we inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core here on American Family Radio. I'm Walker Wildmon, your host for today's edition of the program. Rick Green and I host the show each week, Monday through Friday, and we bring you a best of or a special each weekend as well, a couple times over the weekend. But this is our Monday edition of the program, and we've got a couple of guests with us for the hour over the next few segments, and got some current events that we'll cover throughout the show today. Before we get into some of the content, let's turn our attention to the scripture. Proverbs chapter 16 is where we are this week. Proverbs chapter 16. Looking at verse 12, verse 12 says, "It is an abomination for kings to commit wicked acts, for a throne is established on righteousness." It is an abomination for kings to commit wicked acts, for a throne is established on righteousness. Well, the one thing I want to point out here, the point I want to make, or the point that really the passage makes here as we kind of pick it apart, is that not only did God institute and create government, but he did so with righteousness in mind. And that often gets missed because you can convince someone, especially a believer, that government was God's idea. And that's really one point in this overall picture. But then to then go from there to, well, government's purpose is righteousness. To the contrary, government's purpose is to punish the evildoer, to keep wickedness at bay. And that connection often gets missed, even within the Christian community and people who profess to believe in the Bible, is that not only is government God's idea, but government's purpose is to promote and advance righteousness and to punish the evildoer. And so government, if I had to end on one sentence, government is a moral actor. Government is a moral actor. So this falsehood that government can be secular, government can be amoral, government can be anti-God, government can be, quote, neutral, is a falsehood. It falls flat on its face. The argument does not stand. Government is inherently a moral actor. And because that's true, government can also be very evil. And we've seen example after example throughout human history of governments being evil because they reject their mandate as given by our Creator. That's Proverbs chapter 16, verse 12. Well, we've got several tours coming up in the fall and, of course, in the spring. There's only a handful of seats left for our annual Washington, D.C., Williamsburg trip coming up in September. So the D.C. portion is already full, but if you've never been to Colonial Williamsburg, we're going in September, the 14th through the 17th. Those are the dates for the Williamsburg portion. You can go over to wildmangroup.com to check out those dates. September 14 through 17, we'll be in Colonial Williamsburg, and then we'll be in D.C. in the days following, but that portion's already full. Then looking at early 2026, and you may be saying, 2026? What? We're still in 25. Yes, we are, but we're halfway through it. And these tours are filling up quickly. We're going to Greece and Israel back-to-back, really in order. We're going to Israel and Greece, back-to-back in March of next year, March of 2026, which is less than 10 months away. So if you want to join us on one or both of those trips, you can go over to wildmangroup.com to check out the dates and all the information. And I will note the Footsteps of Paul tour is a brand new trip. This is going to be our first time over to Greece as a group, covering the Footsteps of Paul. And then the week before that, we'll be in Israel on our annual Israel trip that we've been doing for 30 plus years. At least my family has. I'm only 31, so I haven't been doing it 30 years, but my family's been doing it for over that. My grandfather started these tours back in the late 60s, early 70s, even before the ministry here. And so we've got a lot of experience over there. That's the only reason I mentioned that. And so it's a great trip, and obviously I'm biased, but we've got hundreds of testimonies of people who have been on the tours with us, and it's life-changing. Going to the land of the Bible it's a spiritual experience, and there's no other way to put it. And so you can go over to wildmangroup.com to check out more information on those trips coming up in early 2026. All right, let's talk economics for a few minutes when we have time left this segment. President Trump and Congress passed and signed into law the One Big Beautiful Bill, as it's literally called in the text. And this bill does a lot of different things. One of the goals of the legislation is to induce economic growth through lowered taxes, lowered regulation. That's a stated objective of the White House here. And Kevin Hassett, who's the National Council on Economic Advisors for the White House, basically the chief economics guy over at the White House, who's been with Trump for a long time, going back to the first term, he's taking issue with this forecasting by the Congressional Budget Office and others that say that we're going to have less than 3% growth over the next 5 to 10 years. The White House's projections here is that we have upwards of 5 to 7, even 8% GDP growth that helps us dig our way out of this deficit problem. So let's listen to Kevin Hassett on his GDP projections.
CBO says that the Senate bill increases the deficit by $3.3 trillion from 2025 to 2034, and that is $1 trillion more than the House bill. There were already concerns about the deficit in this bill. Do you disagree with those numbers?
Oh, I 100% disagree with those numbers. You remember that in the House bill, there were a bunch of things that were temporary, that were there for the first 4 or 5 years, but then looked like they raised money in the out years. But of course, a big tax hike in the 5th year is going to cause a recession and reduce growth and increase the deficit. The number that I think is the best number to think about when you're looking at that $3.3 trillion is that if we get 3% growth instead of 1.8% growth out of this bill, then that adds $4 trillion to revenue, which means that this thing is a big deficit reducer. This is the biggest spending cut in history, the biggest tax cut in history, and with a little bit of growth, it's going to be incredibly positive for the budget. And finally, don't forget, this isn't the only bite of the apple, that we've got lots of discretionary spending that we're planning to send up to the Senate to rescind. Russ Vogt, the OMB director, suggests that maybe that's going to amount to about $160 billion this year. If you get the $160 billion of rescissions, then multiply that by 10 to think about what the deficit impact is. And so this is a very fiscally responsible bill.
Well, there you have it. This is the problem with the Congressional Budget Office. Their models are woefully inadequate, and their models are honestly dumb. I don't know how else to put it. Their models are not factoring in critical components of this whole plan. For example, the Congressional Budget Office ran the deficit projections for the One Big Beautiful Bill under the assumption that the Trump tax cuts don't get renewed. I'm sorry, that they do get renewed. And that they also ran the projections under the model that there's no growth. There's no additional growth. That the growth that we have under Biden is the growth that we'll have over the next 10 years, which is measly growth. 2 to 3%, 3% at best. And there's tons of other reasons why the Congressional Budget Office is just not helpful. Their models just aren't helpful. So I don't even know why they exist. And they're a concoction of Congress. And we've got Congress full of 535 lawmakers when you add in the Senate. And these guys can't run their own numbers. I mean, can you not get some interns to run your own economic numbers? Instead, we have to staff the Congressional Budget Office. And the Congressional Budget Office, it depends on who's in the White House and who's in the majority, depending on what kind of data they're putting out. But these numbers were completely unhelpful. And here's the reality. The reality is that this legislation that is now law, the One Big Beautiful Bill, will undoubtedly spur growth. There's just no doubt about it. It will spur growth. And you pair this with the flatlining or lowering is a best case scenario of deficits. But if you can just flatline spending and not continue to compound the deficits and basically lower the deficits, this situation is gonna get much better. Now, it's not gonna be rosy. It's not gonna be glamorous. Nobody's gonna be excited about 40 trillion in debt instead of 50, but it could have been worse. And are we on the right track? That's the question here. And so a lot of the apocalyptic, Rand Paul talk about the deficit was operating under a lot of the Congressional Budget Office talking points that were assuming the worst, pretty much. They were just assuming the worst in every category that over a 10-year period. Another thing I want to mention is that we've been running a deficit for, a couple of decades? Every year we run a deficit. Now, it's worsened, but I just find it quite humorous that all of a sudden when Trump gets in charge, the media and others are concerned about the deficit. Oh, really? You're concerned about the deficit? Okay, where have you been for the last 20 years since Obama and before, when we started racking up hundreds of billions of dollars in deficits every year to the tune now where we're running $1 to $2 trillion deficits? Easy. So my point is are deficits a problem or are they not? Because they can't just be a problem when Trump's in the White House, and then when Biden's in the White House, deficits aren't a problem. The reality is that deficits are a problem. It's unsustainable. And that's the problem that Trump is dealing with right now, is the deficits are too big. They're too big, and we really don't need deficits at all. We need surplus. At a minimum, we need break even. But ideally, we need surplus. But that's fairy tale land. We're not going to be in surplus. I mean, we would have to have stable, sane, normal, smart leadership for a sustained period of time, probably a decade, in order to achieve a balanced budget where you only spend what you bring in. But the problem we keep running into as a country is because our leadership keeps changing. And the Democrats get in charge, and the Republicans get in charge, and the Democrats get in charge, and the Republicans get in charge. So we keep changing leadership. Nobody can agree on anything. Furthermore, the incentive structure is just really bad. And what I mean by that is, how many politicians, how many elected lawmakers in Washington are incentivized to spend less money? I'm not talking about incentivized from a moral perspective or incentivized from a do we want a country in 50 years perspective. I'm talking about personally, how many lawmakers are personally incentivized to spend less money, spend less taxpayer dollars. And the reality is, unfortunately, the incentivization, that's a big word, I know, of spending money in Washington, they're heavily incentivized to spend more because of kickbacks and special interest, and my state gets money, and I need campaign contributions from these lobbyists. And so nobody's incentivized to rein it in. That's the core fundamental problem that Washington faces, is a lack of incentive for reining in the deficit spending. We'll be back.
following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
Hi, my name's Neil. I have some advice for you if you've been trying to break free from credit card debt. You can start by doing what I did. Get your bills together and call Trinity Debt Management. Trinity is dedicated to helping people like me become debt-free. When I called, my first experience was a feeling of relief. My counselor was kind, and best of all, she didn't judge me. In just a few minutes, she helped me figure out a plan that consolidated all my bills into one lower monthly payment. This substantially reduced my high interest rates and put me on the road to success. In the end, I saved thousands in interest, and today, my credit card debt is a thing of the past.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Neil. Take it from someone who's been there. Call Trinity and become debt-free for keeps.
1-800-788-1813.
Jesus' final words to his disciples were to go into all the world and teach the gospel, making disciples of all nations. For more than 27 years, Tomorrow Clubs International has faithfully answered that call by partnering with local churches in some of the world's poorest nations. Here's a report from a team leader.
When children learn to follow Jesus, they become disciple makers, influencing their families and friends. The gospel then overflows into the community, bringing repentance, reconciliation, church growth, and even reduction in crime and substance abuse.
More than 500,000 children have learned to follow Jesus through Tomorrow Clubs. Kids also learn practical life skills such as cooking, woodworking, and the English language, preparing them for a brighter future. To learn more about the life-changing work of Tomorrow Clubs International, go to tomorrowclubs.org. That's tomorrowclubs.org. All gifts are tax deductible.
Hello, everybody. I'm Walker Wildmon, Vice President here at American Family Association. Well, my brother Wesley and I were following in the footsteps of my dad, our dad, and my grandfather, Don Wildmon, by leading tours to places of the Bible. And so this next March, we're going to be going to Greece and following the footsteps of Paul. So we're so very excited about this trip, and we'll hope you'll join us. Here's a couple of the places that we're going to visit. We're going to visit Philippi, Thessalonica, Corinth, and all the various Greek cities that you read about in the book of Acts and Paul's epistles. And so you can find the dates, locations, pricing, and much more over at wildmangroup.com. You can also find out more about my dad's trip and my mom over to Israel. They're going to be in Israel in March as well. These trips are back-to-back, and you can do both if you would like. All the information about Footsteps of Paul, Greece, Israel, all of these trips in March of 2026, just visit wildmangroup.com.
At the Core podcasts are available at afr.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to The Core here on American Family Radio. Well, I do want to jump to our next guest. Steve Crampton's in with us. He's an assistant general counsel here at AFA, been with the ministry for on and off for a couple decades. And more than that, probably 3+ decades. And he's also served as senior counsel at Thomas More Society, which is a religious freedom law firm that's been around for a long time, too. Steve, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
It's 30+ years.
Actually,
right?
It is, yeah.
Probably 30 to 35.
Yes, that's exactly right.
So been around the ministry a long time and worked with my grandfather and my dad over the years. Steve, we wanted to have you on because you're very familiar with this space when it comes to religious freedom litigation. And one of the tools that Biden's Department of Justice used, and this was a intentional targeting. This wasn't a one-off case picked up by a couple prosecutors. This was a whole project, really, of Biden, and that is targeting pro-lifers. I mean, right. I think they had a whole DOJ task force. Their job was to target pro-lifers, or quote unquote, protect reproductive rights, end quote. Tell us about this FACE Act that was kind of brought out of nowhere. It was on the books for a while, yes. But Biden and them basically made a name out of it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, FACE was enacted in 1994. Within a year of my start here, so we filed one of the first lawsuits challenging its constitutionality. But as you say, it kind of has been almost just lame on the books for most of its existence. In fact, even during the first 2 years of Biden's administration, he only brought 2 face cases. And immediately after the leak of the Dobbs decision and the notion that Roe against Wade was going to be overturned, suddenly they just came out of nowhere and really were almost like turning over every rock to find pro-lifers that had acted within years before in order to throw the book at them.
So this would have been a Clinton thing then.
Yes,
that
it
he
was
would
a
have
Clinton
signed
thing.
it. Now,
That's right.
don't tell me that was Newt Gingrich. That wasn't Newt Gingrich.
No, this was just Democrats. Chuck Schumer in the House at the time, and Teddy Kennedy ran it in the Senate.
That shows how long they've been around.
That's a long time ago,
Chuck
right?
Schumer in the 90s.
Yeah.
Goodness, wow. Yeah, that's like, you look at Pelosi and others, they've been there a long time. Some of them 40 plus years. It's crazy. Biden's been in politics 70-80% of his life. I think he started in Delaware, like local office in Delaware. It's crazy to look at how long they've been in politics. But so this FACE Act was used by Biden's Department of Justice to go after pro-lifers. And to your point, they went after instances or events that occurred even pre the Roe v. Wade being overturned. They were going back a couple of years at least.
Exactly.
Before we get into some of these cases that you've handled and represented, give us kind of the layperson's perspective or overview of what this FACE Act actually is. Like, is there anything good about it, or was it just a weaponized, law from the beginning?
Yeah, probably two minds about whether there's anything good about it. But in a nutshell, probably before your time, really, there were thousands of Christians that were mobilized to come out in a peaceful way, basically engage in sit-ins outside abortion clinic entrances in the late 80s, early 90s, the Operation Rescue timeframe.
Okay.
And along with that was an increased awareness of how bad abortion really is. And there were a few, I mean just a handful of people that went violent, right? So you had an occasional firebombing, you had bomb threats, and you had one abortionist shot during the time that the FACE Act was even being considered. But the reality is, Walker, what the FACE Act says it prohibits is the use of force or threat of force, or the big one is physical obstruction that interferes with folks trying to get into reproductive health services.
Right.
But if you think about it, the use of force, the use of threats of force, they're already prohibited under state law. You don't need a federal act to come in and
be
help
either
that.
trespassing or simple assault, right?
Yeah, that's all that was.
Depending on the
But if
case.
you're shooting people,
Right.
you can go down for a long time under state law.
Yeah.
What you couldn't really stop was the physical obstruction. It was sit-ins. And so the federal movement here under FACE, I am utterly convinced, having read the legislative history, litigated these cases for 30 plus years, it's all about stopping peaceful sit-ins outside abortion clinics.
Right.
And if you think about, all the other leftist movements of late, almost all of them, mostly nonviolent, but the fact is violence is always a part of theirs. In virtually all the FACE cases, certainly all the ones that we're talking about in this recent time frame, they were peaceful events.
Yeah.
No one would ever dream of taking a BLM riot and federalizing it and throwing them in prison for many years, right?
Yeah.
But for Christians that dare to stand up against abortion, they want to put them in federal prison. FACE says 6 months is the maximum term for a first offense.
But to your point about there already being statutes on the books, either state or federal, that give private property owners, just to speak about this neutrally, a remedy for people who are protesting, whether it's abortion or whatever.
Yeah.
Even a sit-in, if the owner of the building wants them out, law enforcement shows up, it's a simple trespass charge.
Oh, that's exactly right. And that's what happened in the early days of Operation Rescue. But here's the problem. You go to jail for a few hours, maybe overnight, $50, $100 fine. You can be back on the street and back at that clinic again, sitting in front of the door. They didn't want those returns. That's what they were seeing.
Yeah. And to your point, this is not a case where, law and order strikes both ways. Ideologically, this has been this is completely one-sided in the application of the principle.
Okay, may I say,
Yeah.
Chip Roy has led the charge in the House, Mike Lee in the Senate, to repeal FACE.
Yeah.
And I know we'll get there. I want to
Sure.
jump ahead.
Yeah.
They did a deep dive. 98% of the prosecutions under FACE. Pro-lifers.
Yeah.
But you say it's only one way. The fact is, Orrin Hatch, when he was in the Senate, thought he was doing something good, tagged on basically almost like an irrelevant kind of aside, but said, okay, if we're going to protect reproductive health services, let's at least also protect houses of worship. So theoretically, FACE protects churches and pregnancy resource centers.
How
as
many
well.
of those charges have been brought?
About 2.
Yeah. So that's the problem.
That's the problem.
And a lot of this gets into, not only do you have a law that is arguably bad, even though you may say one or two parts of it's
Yes.
good or is justified, but then you have prosecutors that are selective. And
Exactly.
And that's what happened here, is you had Biden's prosecutors pick it up. And it really shows, Steve, yes, we need to repeal FACE, and I know that's what we're on here to talk about. But when you've got bad, corrupt prosecutors, they're going to dig up anything and everything. It's like the officer that you may think you're doing everything right, and if the officer wants to pull you over, will
so
pull
right.
you over.
Yeah.
And if he's having a bad day, you'll find you hitting the yellow line, and that's your you violated some kind of traffic law, and then they'll pull you over.
You know, you were talking earlier about how fundamental righteousness is to government.
Yeah.
Psalm 89, righteousness and justice are the foundation even of God's throne, right?
Yeah.
Didn't you feel under the Biden administration like our very foundations were sort of teetering because they refused to enforce laws equally?
Yes.
And even, like you say, really looking for any excuse to take down even peaceful attendees. You remember the Catholic deal where the FBI was instructed
they were sending in
formally,
informants,
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean,
And
isn't there a sense?
They were sending out memos, basically highlighting what Catholics believe, and you need to keep an eye out for them.
and calling us domestic terrorists, basically, right?
Yes.
We were threats to the democracy,
Yeah.
air quotes.
Yeah, so this FACE Act needed to be repealed, and it's been presented in the House. Hasn't it? Has it passed the House, or am I making that up?
No, but what you are remembering is it passed the Judiciary Committee, which was
Okay.
a very
It
big
came out of
deal.
committee.
So we're out of committee. Theoretically, the Speaker, Johnson, could bring it to the floor for a vote. He's now reassigned it to the Rules Committee. So that's where our focus is right now. We're working closely with Chip Roy and others in the House to try to push this thing through and make it a priority. I really think if we don't act soon,
Yeah.
it's going to be right back in the hands of the wrong guys in the administration and be used against us again. And we talk about even-handedness. If I can throw in, you may remember after the Dobbs decision, the attacks on churches
Yes.
and pregnancy resource centers, literally hundreds. At one point, it was one a week. One analyst estimated 22 times more likely to be firebombed, vandalized if you're a pregnancy resource center or a conservative church than an abortion clinic. But what do? They only enforce it against the pro-lifers.
Yeah, and that gets into the ideological makeup of the two sides. Largely speaking, Christians and pro-lifers, which the vast majority of pro-lifers derive their views from their faith, from their religious convictions, are largely speaking nonviolent people, and don't think that violence is acceptable under any circumstance. But as far as protesting laws that are unjust, but the other side, the left, all they know is violence.
It does seem that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, because you talked about the rioting, the looting, the post-Dobbs response. I mean, it's a very violent trend going on because they view this government as like their god, and the laws, as the end-all be-all, and so it's a really an irrational way of going about it. And you're right. I would guarantee if you looked at the statistics, not just on the FACE Act, but on all other kind of political protest, the violence, vast majority of it is on the ideological left side.
I believe that's right.
At least that's been the case in the last 5 to 10 years, especially under Obama and Biden.
By the way, in that vein, when Biden wouldn't lift a finger to and even investigate these acts against the churches and the pregnancy resource centers. Harmeet Dillon, who's now over the Civil Rights Division, that is the one that prosecutes FACE, has recently publicly announced they're coming after those pro-abortion activists who have attacked the churches and all. One wonders whether even Democrats may suddenly come around to want to support a repeal of FACE.
I think that's the only way you get the Democrats on board.
Right.
Because as long as you're using the FACE Act to target pro-lifers, the Democrats are going to be 100% on board with it.
Yes.
They're going to be fine with it. They're going to say it's a great law. We need to keep it on the books, and here's the reason
Yes.
why. But if the Department of Justice will make a point out of this, to use the law, to apply the law on the books as is today,
Yes.
evenly, which means targeting pro-abortion groups as well, or activists, then you might get Democrats on board with the repeal. But you're going to need 60 votes in the Senate, right?
I know. That's the real hurdle.
I know.
Is the Senate and the filibuster. Yeah.
So on that, Steve, since I didn't bring you on to talk about this, the filibuster, I talked about it last week. It's so frustrating because it's not in the Constitution. This is an extra constitutional rule, if you will, provision brought about by the Senate itself.
Yes.
That's not how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to be a simple majority in both chambers.
You know, that's all true. But historically, the Senate loves its traditions, right? And its rules. So they made these rules, and frankly, both sides have benefited from the filibuster. I mean, how many years have the Republicans been out of office, and but for the filibuster, would have been completely run over on all kinds of radical legislation.
Let me ask you this, though, and this is getting down into pure opinion. It's not Proverbs says, or the Constitution says, but is that worth the risk? Because some days I say it's worth the risk. Yeah. Like, let's let the Democrats do whatever they want to do, even though it's probably going to harm us because they're going to come after us. But let's let the American people see how they want to roll.
You know, I wonder if we polled the American people after the Biden administration, how many of us would say, go ahead, give them more power? You know, it was so scary what they were doing with the filibuster in place.
Correct.
I don't know. I think some of us might blink.
Yeah.
And may I posit in that vein, since we're kind of down this rabbit hole, I would love to see us go back to the way the Senate was originally constructed under the Constitution, not elected by popular vote, but elected from each state. Each state gets to pick its senator.
The state legislature?
Yes.
Okay.
And that removes, to some degree, the Senate from that whole kind of political ebb and flow of popular opinion.
Yes.
And frankly, the mainstream media that influences that opinion.
Yeah.
And gives them a standing to be true statesmen, as they say.
Representing the state interest.
Yes.
Per the elected representative of the
I think
state.
that would cure a lot of these issues.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, term limits is a wish list item, but you've got to have, even with the constitutional amendment, you've got to have the Congress, both chambers get involved there to ratify it. So they would have to impose term limits on themselves. Which
good luck with that.
Yeah, politically speaking, we can't even get them to spend less money,
right?
Yeah. Much less put term limits on themselves. Folks, we need Congress to repeal the FACE Act. We need to get this thing over to the Senate. There's no excuse why Republicans in the House cannot get this over to the Senate and force a vote. Have Senate Majority Leader John Thune force a vote on the Senate floor. There's no reason with a Republican majority this can't be done, and there should be zero. Disunity in the Republican Party and caucus on this matter. I mean, this is a law that's been weaponized by the Biden Department of Justice and has caused insufferable damage and harm to pro-lifers. And Steve, we got about a minute left, but you've actually represented clients who've been charged.
We were way too involved in all these federal cases, and let me just give you one. Paul Vaughn from Tennessee, a dear friend of mine now. In fact, I've been communicating with him this morning. Convicted in Tennessee, and he wasn't even near the door, by the way, at this thing. He was convicted under the aiding and abetting and conspiracy charges that they tacked on for the first time in our nation's history. So he faced up to 11 years in prison. Thankfully, he didn't get that much. But they arrested him at gunpoint, Walker, in front of his kids, and they're still suffering from that.
Yeah, absolutely. These stories are tragic, folks, and this is why we need righteous laws on the books, and we need to get the unrighteous ones off, and that includes the FACE Act. And then secondly, We need prosecutors who have morals, who have values that adhere to those of our founding fathers. We'll be back in a few.
When you hear this,
this is American Family News.
You know what follows is the truth. Your news from a Christian perspective.
Hundreds of teachers are going to have to walk into that school building, and they are forced to swallow political ideology that in many cases violates their very faith and conscience.
If you miss it at the top of the hour, American Family News podcasts are available at afn.net. And sign up for our daily news brief at afn.net. Hey, if you've never heard of AFA Stream, let me tell you about it. It's video streaming that goes beyond just entertainment. Yeah, there are shorts and feature films for all ages, but they're all backed by scriptural themes. You'll also find resources to help you grow closer to God, along with documentaries like Culture Warrior, the story of Don Wildmon and the founding of AFA. There's a lot of free content, but if you become a Great Commission partner, you'll unlock much more. Check it out today at stream.afa.net. Culture really doesn't like to line up with God's Word. In our age of instant information and misinformation, where do you find the truth about the gender confusion being spread by the world?
The truth is ours to discover if we'll just open the Word of God and seek Him.
You can go from Ephesians 5 to Ephesians 6 in the instruction for fathers to instruct their children. There it's noteworthy that explicitly the fathers are given a role in instructing the children.
I think modern day women are taught, when we think of submission in terms of quiet, never saying anything and being an obedient robot, that's not what Scripture teaches. It doesn't mean a blind acquiescence.
In His Image is a life-changing documentary that answers those controversial questions from the only source for real truth, the Bible. See In His Image for the first time or watch it again, and invite your family and friends to watch as well. Visit resources.afa.net. resources.afa.net.
A restaurant owner once told his helper, "Go get 25 quarters." The young man ran around collecting coins, only to learn the boss meant quarter chickens. The issue? A lack of clarity. We can do the same thing with the gospel. A friend once told his grandson, "Give your heart to Jesus," and the boy burst into tears, thinking he couldn't live without his heart. Paul kept it simple in 1 Corinthians 15. Christ died for our sins, was buried, and rose again. That's the gospel. Paul also told the jailer, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved." Let's not make the gospel harder than God made it. Just believe Jesus died for your sins and rose again. With today's Moment in Grace, I'm Jim Scudder.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Walker Wildmon.
Welcome back to the last segment of today's program. I'm Walker Wildmon. Glad to have you with us here on American Family Radio. This show you can subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. You can just type in At the Core, and you can subscribe to the show in the form of a podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple, Android, Roku, Spotify, all the various podcast platforms out there. We have the show uploaded each and every afternoon for your convenience, and you can click the subscribe button or the follow icon, and then we'll have it queued up in your library each and every day for you to listen to. Well, I want to jump to our next guest. Anna Derbyshire is with us. Anna is the U.S. campaign director for Citizen Go, and they're a global advocacy organization that promotes pro-life, pro-family, and religious freedom causes. Anna, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Walker. It's great to be here.
Well, Anna, we, for the first time through this legislation that President Trump signed over the weekend, on Friday specifically, for the first time, the pro-life movement has effectively been able to exclude abortion providers from Medicaid reimbursements. And I know that might sound too policy, talkish and boring for our audience, but explain to us the win here. This is a big deal that's never been done before.
Well, several years ago when we first started talking about the possibility of defunding the abortion industry, it was like a dream. There's no way the federal government's ever going to stop paying with our money for abortions. They're just not going to do it. So when this showed up after we had done campaigns for the Senate and for the House of Representatives, because they're the purse strings, when it came out in the big, beautiful bill, it was a shock. And so the win is that our money is not going to go to pay for abortions for the first time since our government started paying for abortions, which is huge. It's monumental. And so there can be all kinds of things said on the conservative side about the one big beautiful bill, what it did, what it didn't do. But this, I think, was the most important thing. Now, and originally we wanted it for 10 years. The House gave it to us for 10. The Senate chopped it down to 1. And sadly, this is the only piece of the bill that actually has this kind of a time constraint. But man, to get that language into legislation is pivotal and huge. It's magnificent.
Yeah, it is. And explain briefly how these Medicaid reimbursements work, because I know it gets a little bit confusing, all these different programs, these different government programs. But explain briefly how that's been working and what's different as far as abortion providers not being able to participate anymore.
Well, it's interesting because you have the different things that the abortion industry does. It's not just abortions. They have education, they have reproductive services, they have all of these different things. So in different ways, we may still be funding the abortion industry. We just won't be supporting directly the actual abortion of a baby. And so while right now this is the best win we can get, it is chopped up into pieces. And the U.S. is really just a very small sliver of what the scope of Planned Parenthood actually is.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, that's part of it. And the big thing here is that any entity, obviously Planned Parenthood is the biggest, but any entity that performs abortion is disqualified from even participating in the Medicaid program at all. The only way they can participate is if they stop doing abortions or split up their entity into multiple entities, one that does abortion and one that doesn't, which is a legal nightmare to try to do that. But also, let's talk about what states can do, because the Supreme Court just ruled last week on whether or not states, who actually are the ones facilitating Medicaid, whether or not they can disqualify abortion providers through state statute and state policy. So talk about that low-hanging fruit for a lot of these conservative states.
Well, right now that's just been passed in one state. And of course, that was right before the One Big Beautiful Bill was signed. And so this just gives an open door for the other states, Texas, Louisiana, some different ones that already have some things going to get this taken care of, to where the states that Medicaid money flows through can say it's not going to fund abortions, where after this year is over, and if the federal government goes back to funding abortions, the states can one by one, the conservative states, the states that are pro-life, can say not in our state. The money is not going there. The federal funding that we get that came from our state initially anyway is not going to go to fund abortion. So yeah, it gives power back to the states when it comes to that funding for sure. And that's huge, because the states eventually put enough pressure on the federal legislators to also go ahead and make it much more permanent. Right now, the 1 year is just like, I feel like it's a moment that the states have an opportunity to really get some things done that we need to make sure and make it happen. So those local elections, all of those things are so important this year, just incredibly valuable when it comes to the pro-life movement.
This this is a generational opportunity for states to build on this victory here. You mentioned it's only 12 months. This will have to be renewed by Congress if they decide to keep it going, meaning the defunding of abortion providers through Medicaid. But yeah, to your point, states need to jump on this. And when I say they need to move on this, I'm talking emergency sessions, or special sessions, as they're called, where the governor convenes a legislature to enact legislation. That needs to be done very, very quickly, because unfortunately some of these legislatures don't meet again until January. of 2026. So we're talking 5, 6, 7 months down the road. Some of them, like Texas, only meet every other year. So this needs to be a priority for conservative states all around the country to move on this opportunity to build on this pro-life victory by the president and the Congress. And tell us about how other ways that abortion providers get money, government money, because Medicaid is just one of multiple avenues that groups like Planned Parenthood receive millions and millions of dollars from the government.
Well, you want to talk, I'd like to kind of jump maybe here to internationally, because we think of Planned Parenthood as being very U.S. centric, when really the International Planned Parenthood Federation is a monolith that Planned Parenthood USA is less than 1% of what IPPF, International Planned Parenthood Federation, does. So the United States is this very small sliver, really, when you put it in the perspective of the funds that are going to the abortion industry. It is unthinkable what's happening internationally. The Planned Parenthood is that one little piece of the abortion industry that we see all the time, but they're doing more than just abortions. They're doing gender transitions. They're giving gender medications. They're giving sex education to young children without parental consent. They're providing contraceptives without parental consent. Even in libraries in California now, they're providing, Planned Parenthood has partnered with libraries in California to give condoms and dental dams and lubricants and education in the children's sections of the library. So Planned Parenthood is so much more than abortion, and we forget that it's not just, this little abortion clinic over downtown in this certain area. It is an absolute monster, not only here in the States, but around the world. And we have to find a way to stop it and defund it, not just here, but abroad, which of course we do that through the Helms Amendment. But at the same time, like I said, with the other, even if you're not directly funding an abortion, you're funding their offices, their education, all the things that goes to run a business. Our funds can still go to those things in the international community when it comes to the IPPF.
Once again, we're talking to Anna Derbyshire with the Citizen Go organization. She's a U.S. campaign director there. One of the talking points of Planned Parenthood is that, abortions is only a small portion of what we do. But I don't consider, number one, if that were true, Anna, then they would have no problem just giving up abortions. If they want to get Medicaid funds, then you just stop doing abortions, because after all, it's such a small portion of what they do. But as you and I know, that's just not true.
Mm-hmm. Right. Their main focus is still the population thing. It's still specific. They're very racially motivated in certain neighborhoods and certain nations. Yep. So yes, abortion is still their number one thing. But I will say internationally, especially, they are working hard to legalize prostitution, giving pornography to children. They actually have an educational piece that helps HIV positive children know how to go ahead and have sex with their peers, making it, unexplainable why you would even want to do this to kids. Abortion without consent of parents. They want to eliminate all the barriers like religion and culture, even from nations that absolutely don't want them there. And all the funding that's coming internationally, we have to understand that coming through the United Nations, through UNICEF, through these organizations, our money is still being funneled to the abortion industry overseas. And what happens is that if someone wants education in their third world country and the government says, we're going to broker a deal with the United Nations to make sure we can build some schools, can do some things, get some curriculum, they will always tack on the International Planned Parenthood Federation curriculum and training with a certain portion of whatever money they get for education or health. So you're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars from international money, including ours, still funding abortion and all these other things we said. It's not as simple as, we need to close down this little abortion clinic in our neighborhood. And I had the opportunity to speak actually at the Human Rights Council just last week, talking about government stop using the public funds to fund the abortion industry. Yeah, because it's more than it is abortion. Absolutely, it's the killing of the innocent. But their fingers are in everything.
Yeah.
And we don't realize what they're really after. They're after an absolute cultural coercion, masked as development.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very evil what they're doing, and there's no other way to explain it. Anna, thank you so much for coming on the program. Tell our folks more about your website and how they can find out about your work.
Well, we are at citizengo.org, and we are an international organization, as you had already stated. And you can sign petitions. You can show up with us in Washington, D.C., and at the United Nations, and in your state and in your city places. We are a grassroots. We empower people to do something. I think so many times we're like, well, what can I do? Well, the first place we can go is to petition the government. We hand deliver all the petitions to Congress, and get as close to the decision makers we can possibly get with your voices.
Absolutely. Hey, Anna, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Anna Derbyshire with Citizen Go. Check out their website for more work or for more information on their work. One headline that I want to talk about before we wrap up the program that really dovetails well into this subject of abortion and depopulation, which is ultimately what this is about. And this is why the climate change lunacy is a problem, is because fundamentally it's about depopulation. And not only is the climate change and global warming a hoax, it's built on falsehoods, but the goal of it, even if you assume that the data they present is true, the goal of it is depopulation, which is immoral and it's wrong. And so those who push this climate change are actually the ones pushing immorality under the guise of caring for the planet. But listen to this headline out of the UK. United Kingdom government urges young people to have more children amid plummeting birth rates. And if I had to predict what is going to become a growing problem, and it's already a major problem, but I think the problem is going to continue to grow unimpeded, is this drastic decline in population. Both domestically in the U.S. and elsewhere, there is a rapid decline in birth rates. And when you do 50 to 70 years of abortion, birth control, climate change hysteria, what do you think you're going to get? You are getting fruitlessness. You are getting the lack of fruit. And it's ultimately going to severely damage, maybe not lead to the end of, but severely damage these nations that have gone down this godless pagan path of depopulation. And depopulation takes form in many different shapes. You have this rampant use of birth control. You have abortion, and you have this fear-mongering about climate change and the future, and you got record levels of anxiety amongst young people, and you've got marriage being belittled, out-of-wedlock births being, incentivized. The whole structure has been twisted in a way that is disincentivizing for the biblical family. And it's a major, major problem. And so the United Kingdom is coming to the realization that they need more families and they need more children. And so now their government, starting with the Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson, is now urging more young people to consider starting families amid the demographic crisis in the UK. So more people need to wake up to this rapid population decline.